Hey, Coach.
Hey, how you doing, man?
Doing well. Thanks for a couple minutes this afternoon.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Sounds good. All right, to
Hey,
the
can
group,
I,
if you
can I
got
say
questions, please use
say
the
one
rate.
thing?
Yes, sir.
Hey, I just wanted, as before we get going, I heard about the tragic passing of Coach Peacock up at Western Carolina. And as someone that was a high school coach in Florida, and I got to know over a few years down that way and some of the places he's been, I wanted to offer my condolences out to his family and friends. It's awful news to hear.
Yes, no question. Well said. All right, to the group, if you have a question for Coach, please use the raised hand function, and we'll get over to you here momentarily. And our first question today will come from Andrew Jones.
Hey, Coach, appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Yeah, sure.
Mac has told us that there's been much more emphasis and much more time spent on special teams this camp.
Yeah.
Gave the obvious things about last year, which you guys were unable to do, and how so many teams were hurt by COVID and not having much time to spend on special teams. Can you kind of walk us through what you guys have been working on, and if it actually is more than you've done at your previous stops?
Yeah, so it's actually been really fun to actually have a spring ball with the boys and install conceptually, right? I think so many times when people start talking about special teams, some of the things they do is they install specifically X's and O's and assignments. And so you lose a little bit of the retention of knowledge from year to year because some of those players graduate, some of those players aren't back. And so one of the things we were able to install over the course of spring and fall camp was a conceptual idea of how we wanted to operate, how we wanted to execute overarching themes throughout special teams. So that way, if there's a new guy going in, he understands the concept of what we're doing and therefore can execute it a little bit faster when there's an opportunity to make a play, when there's not an opportunity to make a play. And that was one of the main things that we were able to establish throughout the course of spring. And then as we progressed into the fall, there's been a huge stressor placed on special teams in terms of it having, an extra couple of minutes during practice, an extra couple of minutes during walkthrough. The attention to detail, I think, from the players has been phenomenal in that regard. I think you'll find that we're a lot faster on special teams than we were a year ago. Obviously, in the year of COVID that we had last year, you were a little bit limited from time to time in what you could do, what you can do, and who you can use. And what's really exciting for me right now is most of those barriers have been eliminated for us. So it's been a lot more fun. In terms of the volume of stuff that we're doing, I think as we progress from a conceptual standpoint in the spring, we're able to increase what our guys are able to do, because as long as it fits within the concepts of how we operate, it allows us to look a little bit differently, but still execute some of the same theories behind it.
To get a little better understanding, going back to last year, there were some issues the first half of the season or so, but a lot of stuff cleaned up during the course of the year. Was that an example of them understanding the conceptualizing that you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly right. So, we do things a little bit differently. Obviously, some of the punt stuff we do is a little bit different. How we operate on punt return philosophically, right? It's different than a lot of other people do it, right? So it creates problems. And I think one of the things that we try to do is we try to always try to find how can we gain an advantage numerically or field space wise in what we do, and how does that fit within our concept. Right. And so that's a different type of approach as opposed to just plain old basic X's and O's. You line up here, you go there. Right. So we give the kids sometimes some freedom in that regard within the concept of what we do, so they can take advantage of the situations that are presented to them. And I think that started to clarify for those guys as we approach the second half of the season. And some of the results were a little bit more obvious from that regard.
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Okay, JB Ricks, go ahead.
Hey, Coach. JB Ricks here from Spectrum News One. I appreciate you. I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for taking out this time. I know you work with the linebackers as well as special teams, and I wanted to ask a question about Jeremiah Gemmel. Coach Brown is really, really high on him, and he expects him, to have a real breakout season, and just to kind of like bust onto the scene nationwide or whatnot. What are your thoughts on why Coach Brown is so high on him? And the second part of that question is who within that linebacking core can support him and help him, kind of reach that potential that everyone expects him to reach in 2021?
Yeah, so I don't work directly with Jeremiah too much. He's more of an inside backer as opposed to the outside backers. I do work with him on a daily basis. He's not directly under my position, but I think when you're speaking about Jeremiah Gemmel, there's a few questions you want to ask yourself. Have you ever seen him late for a meeting? Have you ever seen him late for a class? Have you ever seen him late for practice or unprepared for a meeting or class? Right, and then he demonstrates that on the field with how he executes in his command of the defense. Right. When you come to this building and you look for a few people, there's a few people you're going to see in this building 24/7. Right. The guys that are here all the time. You're going to see Sam Howell. right? Like that guy's in here watching film all the time. You're going to see Jeremiah Gemmel here all the time, watching film, asking questions. It's not unheard of for us to get a text message at 11 o'clock at night asking us, hey, on play 32 in this game, should we do this, or should the shade look like that? So you see him having a full command of the defense and not just his position. And I think when you can expand upon your knowledge base from the whole defense as opposed to just your spot, again, not only do you speak with more confidence, but you play with more confidence because you have an idea of where you can take your chances and your opportunities and what opportunities are going to be presented to you and what calls. And in terms of a support structure around him, I think you're going to see a lot of really great things from Eugene Asante in terms of the other inside linebacker. He's super twitchy. I mean, his first start last year was Texas A&M and played extremely well. Right, played extremely well. Before that, he was on punt team and a couple of other special teams and played sparingly. So I think when you get those two combined, right, a little bit of thunder and lightning in there from that standpoint. All right, it's a lot of fun to watch those guys move. Tamon Fox is an older guy who works as an outside backer. He's got a great command of what we do. Tyrone Hopper. So one of the things we've got right now is a bunch of guys with a lot of ability and a lot of experience, a lot of banked reps, right? And when you can combine a bunch of banked reps on a player, then all of a sudden you're going to have a lot more fruits and benefits to the labor that they've got throughout the course of the years.
Thank you, Coach.
Yeah.
All right, Ross Martin, go ahead.
Hey, Coach Dewitt. I was going to have a question about kind of your returners this year. You lost Daz Newsom, the punt returner, and Michael Carter, who led the kick returning. So wondering who you're looking at for those two spots entering this season. The guys are standing out and getting the most reps at kick returner and punt returner.
Sure. Yeah. At punt returner, I think obviously one of the most dangerous people that we'll see is Josh Downs. He's really done a great job in terms of securing the ball. And conceptually, there's some new things out there that we're doing that benefit that we really, what I looked at, I went back throughout the course of last season. And I want to say there were 43 punt returns over 20 or more yards throughout college football last year. And I went back and I analyzed what were the things that allowed those plays to return. Was it speed to the outside? Was it blocking? Was it penetration? Was it pressure? And so we took those plays and some of the other explosive punt return plays, right, and tried to adapt it under the assumption that Josh, will be one of the top two guys for the punt returner, and how can we adapt it? So I'm really looking forward to seeing what he can get accomplished in terms of how we've changed a little bit on punt return. I think it plays into how well he moves, right, at his normal position, a slot receiver. So we try to pattern some of our punt return stuff off of how he operates as a slot receiver and a punt returner. In terms of kickoff return, I'm really excited about that one. Obviously, you got Ty coming in, who's got a lot of experience back there. I don't think it would be unheard of if all of a sudden, JQ is back there catching a couple of kicks. He's as dangerous as anybody I've seen, and he's a thicker body, right? He's physical. He is not afraid to throw it up in there. One of the things you talk about as a punt returner, or especially as a kick returner, is run through the smoke and not to the smoke. And so from that regard, JQ definitely fits that mold.
And then who's behind Josh Downs? I mean, is there a little depth chart you can give us?
I mean, it's kind of by committee, to be honest with you, to be certain. Gosnell is back there as well, and there's a couple of other guys that we've got back there that are going to be securing. Right, the main thing for us right now, as you look back at it, I think it's 1 out of every 20 punt returns in college football are fumbled. Right, so the main emphasis for us is being able to secure the ball. Right. So, and that battle, that's always an ongoing battle. So we're putting those guys in all the awkward positions. What yard line am I on? Is it close to the sideline? Is it close to being backed up? Am I on the 10-yard line? Am my heels on the 8-yard line? And so what we're trying to do is put those guys in different pressure situations, right? And really fundamentally figure out who is going to be the most secure in all the different scenarios, because there's not just the aspect of having great hands, but having the aspect of field awareness that goes along with it.
And then kick return, it's one of either Ty or JQ.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Gregory Hall, go ahead.
Hey, Jovan, good to see you again.
Hey.
I was just curious. I know under the last coaching staff under Larry Fedora that a player couldn't start unless they started on special teams.
Mm-hmm.
I was just curious if that was something you guys are doing as well, and if which of your freshmen, younger guys are working on special teams to kind of get to that spot.
So I don't think that we have that as a blanket philosophy across the program in terms of being a starter on offense or on defense, especially from the skill positions. However, I'll reiterate this fact. I think by default in the new approach that we have to special teams, that is played out. right? I think by default, because of the nature and the stressors that we've put on special teams, we've turned it into that philosophy without necessarily stating it. What's really exciting for me from that standpoint is I'm getting more phone calls and more people asking me, hey, coach, what about this? Can I do this on punt return? Can I do this on kickoff? Can I do this on kickoff return? Which that is not something that occurred very regularly last year outside of maybe a couple of guys, British and Josh and those guys. But now I'm getting it from all different position groups across the board, whether it's receiver, tight end, outside backer, inside backer, running back, right? I get a million questions every single day from, I mean, those guys are watching the film probably already, right? We did a little punt under pressure today, and they're probably watching the film to see who did what, how, when, and why. So from that standpoint, it's been really fun. What was the second part of that question? I'm sorry.
No, that answered
cool.
it. And I wanted to ask about Kamen Rucker and his development. He came on strong last year, had a great true freshman season, and now it seems to be he's poised to be right there with Tamon, Des Evans, and those guys. What have you seen out of him?
I've seen a bigger variety in the positions he's able to play. I think last year he played primarily, and we did that on purpose, trying to limit the amount of things he had to learn and adapt to. So you keep him in certain positions, whether it's a 4-eye or a 5 technique. We tried to limit his learning a little bit to allow some of his natural skills to be able to play through. I think you'll see an expanded role for him. If you watched film last year, I don't know if Kamen Rucker dropped very much, right? That wasn't necessarily his forte. A little stiff in the hips and the ankles from that standpoint back then. But I think his development has really blossomed as much as he's increased physically, the mental part of it. And that's going to be kind of a recurring theme throughout the course of our team, right? Is how much our guys have developed mentally and understanding of what the expectations are in any given scenario. And that's what I think really allows us to be really multiple in a lot of the things we do at outside backer, where I get a million questions over the course of the summer. Like, you got guys that play inside, outside, over the top. Just any one of the inside, any one of the core positions my guys may be required to play at any given down and distance. And that's one of the beautiful things about what Bateman does on defense, right? It's positionless almost to a certain degree. And so my guys get required to learn a lot. And I think it's really fun when you can get Kamen to be able to understand multiple spots and overarching concepts of the defense, so he can use them in multiple areas, because he's not just an inside B gap, C gap player. He can do a lot more.
And then Mac and Jay have really stressed getting to the quarterback and pass rushing without scheming. How do you balance that with also, like you said, getting guys to learn how to draw back in coverage and things like that?
Yeah. So here's what I can tell you. This last offseason, obviously we weren't allowed to be on the road recruiting. So there was an inordinate amount of time that we had extra in the office. My wife about had me committed. So there was 2 things I completely dedicated myself to outside of the recruiting world. And that was analyzing pass rush and talking to anybody and everybody across the country, NFL, whatever league. I didn't care what league it was. I went out and I researched a bunch of the top pass rush things that I could find. And then I spent an inordinate amount of time talking about special teams as well. And actually had a weekly Zoom over the course of the summer and spring with a bunch of special teams coordinators from around the country, and making sure that we're not playing each other. So I was about 8 to 10 guys that got together every single week. And everybody would present questions and ideas and philosophies without giving away schematics. And I wanted them, and of us 8 to 10, none of us played each other in the next 3 years. So I just brought people from the West Coast, up north, down south, northeast, us, all over the country, just to kind of exchange ideas. And so being able to balance all those things sometimes for sure is an extreme challenge, but it's like, that's the fun part. Like, that's what's really fun.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, over to CL Brown.
Hey, Coach. Coach Brown has talked a lot about winning.
See your face, your camera's off. What's going on?
Yeah, I'm in the car. I'm
okay,
in
I got you.
Coach Brown has talked about winning games on special teams, and I wanted to get your perspective on what area or which unit of special teams do you feel like can take that next step to be dynamic? He talked about being at Texas and having.
Repeat that last part one more again, please.
What unit do you feel like can make the next step to be kind of dynamic on special teams? And Coach Brown used the example of their punt blocking ability at Texas.
Yeah, for sure. So I believe in the years that I've been a special teams coordinator, last year might have been the first year where I didn't block a punt. I'm not positive on that, but I'm pretty sure. So if you want to talk about in terms of dynamic ability and game changing plays, I would probably lean more towards punt block. Right, when you talk about the obvious opportunity for massive change in field position, the area that could be the most improved upon would be at pump block scenarios, right? Philosophically, how are you approaching it? How are you attacking it? Personnel that you're using, right? And so sometimes when you change philosophies, you want to look at what type of players you've got out there, whether it's speed, whether it's length, whether it's cover guys, whether it's thick-headed guys that have to go attack a shield. And then you look at who you're going up against within the league, right? In the ACC, there's some of the best specialists that there are in the country. As you look at it, it was absurd last year, right? Those punters, those kickers have the ability to put the ball where they want the ball to go in all different weather and type scenarios. So you now have to start looking at, can you create stress in other areas? If you're not going to be able to affect the flight of the football, you want to start to look at being able to affect the operation of how they move and how they maneuver. So I think when you look at that, that's some of the approach you want to take to it.
All right. Thanks, Coach.
Yeah, man.
All right. Our last one for Coach will come from Dina King.
Hey, Coach, you're
Hey, how you
returning
doing?
you're returning some very key guys on special teams. Long snapper Drew Little, Grayson Atkins at kicker, and Ben Kiernan at punter. How important is that, returning those guys?
Oh man, like I don't know if it can be overstated, to be quite honest with you. To me, just having the consistency from year to year, where and you don't have to worry about who's going to go out there, who's going to line up, right? When I looked at our snap times over the course, whether it's Drew or Spencer out there snapping, the variation is 1/100th of a second over the course of the last 2 weeks. So from that standpoint, there's a certain level of comfort that not only I as a coach get, but I think the players get as well. So again, and we've touched on this a little bit in terms of conceptualizing what we do on special teams, right? Those guys have a fundamental understanding of what we're trying to do. So I can move on to the next step in what we're trying to get executed, not have to continue to teach the basics like, hey, you're going to snap it here. Now you got to look over here, right? They know that that's considered automatic in their world right now. So now they're able to move up to the next level in terms of thought process. If we're in a 100 level class last year, we're probably in a 300 or 400 level class this year. So that part has provided me with so much comfort level and not having to stress about who's out there. And also I gotten to know them now, right? When you think about last fall, when we got here, and again, obviously you don't want to sound like you're making excuses for stuff, but not having any idea of who those guys are or their mental makeup or what they can handle, right? When you're talking about coaching football, you want to talk about being able to teach kids and how they learn. Well, how does that kid learn? I don't know. I haven't had them for a spring yet. Right. So you want to make sure you get an opportunity to teach to those guys the best way that they can learn things. And then you can move up to the 100 level class to a 200 level class to a 300 level class. And a little bit of that progression happens through the course of last fall as well. So when you start talking about having them from year to year, let alone semester to semester, being able to work with those guys, it's as exciting and as comforting a feeling as I've had in a really long time. I mean, this year I've had more fun coaching football than I've had in a long time. And I'm really excited about it. I tell Coach Brown that all the time. I'm having so much fun and our players are having fun. They're not looking at special teams like it's a burden, right? They're understanding the dynamics of the change in field position and what it can do for us and or against us. So that part's been really exciting for me.
Well, Coach, thank you so much for a few minutes this afternoon.
Sure. All right, guys. Thanks a bunch, man. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care.